Today, Rotarians and guests, we are honoured to welcome the Premier of South Australia, the Honourable Bryden Malinauskas, as our guest speaker. The Premier follows a proud history of Premiers of South Australia addressing the Rotary Club of Adelaide, dating back to 1929 when the Honourable Sir Richard Butler spoke on the future of South Australia. Since this time, we've heard from a number of Premiers, including the Honourable Sir Thomas Playford, Frank Walsh and David Tonkin, to name a few. Our Premier is also a proud family man, married to Annabelle, and they have 3 delightful children. Like most of us, he started his working career in humble yet grounding professions, working through Woolies. He worked his way through university, studying a Bachelor of Commerce, and after serving as the Secretary of the SDA, he entered politics via the Legislative Council and Cabinet under the Weatherall government, where he served in several ministerial portfolios such as police, correctional services and health. He won the seat of Croydon in 2018 and became the Leader of the Opposition. In March 2022, he led the Labor Party to victory and was sworn in as the 47th Premier of South Australia. Today, the Premier speaks to us about his vision for the future of South Australia, a state where I think we'd all agree everyone wants to be right now. So Rotarians and guests, please generously welcome the Premier of South Australia, the Honourable Bryden Malinauskas.
Well, thank you very much, Gildy, for the warm introduction. Rajiv, can I thank you for your leadership of the Rotary Club here in Adelaide, the oldest Rotary Club in our state. Can I acknowledge each and every one of you, committed members of Rotary, an important service club that contributes so much to our community in a variety of ways. I've had the opportunity to be able to observe this firsthand in a number of instances. We were just chatting before about the effort to donate old material from the former Royal Adelaide Hospital, just being one example. And I know there are so many different projects you have around our state and throughout the community seeking to assist those that might not be in a position to be able to assist themselves. And there is something very Australian about that, and it's worthy of commendation and recognition. Can I also acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Kaurna people today and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I think premiers and prime ministers would routinely seek to suggest that the moment that we are living in is the most significant that has ever occurred. So I say that, so what I'm about to say, I do try and say with a degree of objectivity and consciousness of that. But I can't help but feel as though that in the state of South Australia, at this particular point in time, we have an extraordinary opportunity in front of us. In many respects, it is an unprecedented opportunity. The story of South Australia is a really fascinating and interesting one. Many of you will be familiar with our history, but I think it's fair to say that we have been unique in our federation in that we haven't always had our prosperity defined by an abundance of natural resources in the way that is true for the rest of the country. In the 1800s, the Victorians had the gold, which is what the rest of the world wanted and needed. They mined it efficiently for the time, principally using their labour, and they built a strong economy on the back of it. The 20th century in Australia, so much of our national wealth has been defined by the presence of natural gas and coal in New South Wales and Queensland. The 21st century thus far has been defined by Western Australia and their natural gas, but more importantly their iron ore. These are the stories, these are the resources that have underpinned our national wealth and our national endeavour. But here in South Australia, we've never had that big mining boom. Yes, it is true that we've had iterations of copper exploration that have served us well, and there may be more to come, and I'll come to that in a moment. but we've never had the big boom that the other states have had. Instead, our economic prosperity has largely been derived through our own endeavour, our own enterprise, our own ingenuity. And I think that is something that should provide a source of pride for the people of our state. It hasn't always been easy, of course, when you are principally relying upon your own human capacity. We relatively start at a disadvantage, but nonetheless we have prevailed largely to create a free liberal democracy that has an outstanding standard of living, that has the capability to provide generations of people an opportunity to be able to participate in our society in a high quality way. That said, the moment we're in now feels a little bit different. It feels like the opportunity is there to take another step because of circumstances that we find ourselves front and centre to. So I submit to you today that the two biggest global challenges of our time are in actual fact South Australia's opportunity. Think of it in this context. We have two big challenges. The first is geopolitical instability and insecurity. We currently are living in a period with the most instability in a geopolitical context that we've experienced since World War II. The most since World War II. And it's principally focused around the Indo-Pacific. We are in the geographical centre of a new geopolitical tectonic shift in the balance of power. That presents risk, that presents challenge, which necessarily means that throughout the West in particular, but globally, we are going to see an ever-increasing level of expenditure in areas such as defence, space and cyber. And I ask each and every one of you, which state within our federation is best placed, most advanced in participating in the industries of defence, space and cyber? South Australia. South Australia. The second big challenge of our time globally is the need to decarbonise. This is no longer a question of whether or not you believe climate change is real. That has largely been resolved amongst scientists. It is now a question of, I think, what is happening in global shifts in capital. And on any objective analysis of movements within global markets, capital is now moving to areas and industries which are at the forefront of decarbonisation. Now, in a state where we have 77% of all of our electricity needs being met by green renewable energy, principally from solar and wind, well in advance of any other state within the Commonwealth, well in advance of any other jurisdiction around the world, again I ask you, given our relative position of green renewables and its penetration in the economy, which state within the Federation is most advanced to capitalise on the decarbonisation opportunity? Again, it is South Australia. So this is our chance. This is our moment to take the two big global challenges of our time and translate them into opportunity for our state and more specifically future generations of South Australians. The question is, how do we capitalise on that opportunity? What are the public policy levers that are at our disposal to make a difference, to seize that moment? I'll park that. Let's come back to that. Let me first enunciate to you my political theory. I say this with a degree of trepidation, because it's politics after all. But it strikes me that the political orthodoxy for the large part of the 21st century thus far has been political leaders seeking to obtain political capital and then preserve it. Which is a pretty orthodox thing to do. So, put it like this, new government gets elected. Most new governments get elected with a degree of political capital, and then they seek to preserve it, protect it. And then hopefully, by the time the next election comes around, you've got enough political capital to go back to the electorate and say, give us another 3 years or give us another 4 years, whatever it may be. Pretty standard. Nothing wrong with it. It often works. In the more modern political era, over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, particularly in the post-pandemic age, I detect that community want something a little bit more. People's aspirations demand of policymakers a degree of vision and a sense of what actions are being undertaken to tackle the challenges that we currently have. I mentioned 2 of them. There are others such as economic inequality, a sense that there is a growing divide in our community between those who have and those who may not, an increasing sense of hopelessness around the capacity to be able to move up the ladder of opportunity. Different people have different views about that, but ultimately there are big questions that people want answered. And my view about the attempt to preserve political capital is it doesn't necessarily get you anywhere. It certainly doesn't take us forward as a nation or as a state. So my concern is that for those that seek to protect their political capital, that indeed runs its own political risks. Because what happens in politics in the modern age with the 24/7 news cycle and the degree of scrutiny that is placed upon government is this. You're protecting your political capital and then things go wrong. A scandal breaks out in the child protection system. Chip, bit of political capital gone. Something goes wrong in the public sector because someone does something that is outside of process or characterised as maladministration. Chip, bit more political capital gone. Something goes wrong in the hospital system. There's a clinical error somewhere that has a deleterious impact on some people's lives. Chip, bit of political capital gone. Idiot minister buys bottle of wine on credit card on overseas trip. Chip, bit of political capital gone. So chip, 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 and then the term ends, and then the leader, the Premier or the Prime Minister, goes back to the community and they say, elect us for another 4 years, and the capital is eroded. It's diminished. So my theory is a little bit different. My thesis is that rather than just allow the political capital to get chipped out in the day-to-day news cycle, spend the political capital, invest the political capital with the view of doing a few things, trying to make a structural reform, try to do something innovative in an area of public policy. And yes, the chip, chip, chip will still keep happening, but by the end of it, what you want to be able to do is go back to the community at election time and say, sure, those things went wrong in the day-to-day areas of government, but at the end of it, look what we've been able to achieve. Look what we have been able to do. Look what steps have been taken to take us to the bigger picture of where we all want to go. And it is the governments in the past, and I invite you to think about this in your own minds, regardless of what your own political persuasions are. When you think back and contemplate the best governments of our age at either a state or a federal level, it is the ones that have made the tougher decisions, it is the ones that have executed policy with conviction that tend to be the ones that you look back with a degree of affection and nostalgia. The ones that just were passing the time, going through the motions, trying to win elections for the sake of winning elections, they're not the ones that stand the test of time in terms of having a legacy of delivering for the state or the country writ large. With that in mind, we have sought to craft an agenda and a policy that deploys the political capital that the people of South Australia have provided my government with at the election, and use it in such a way to achieve the realisation of those two big opportunities that I enunciated earlier. So what are those policies? Well, let's start with defence, space and cyber. So, post the AUKUS announcement, I very quickly went to a place called Barrow-in-Furness. Many of you may not have heard of Barrow. I confess, 2 years ago, neither had I. But in Barrow-in-Furness, it is an industrial town, or it is a town based on this particular enterprise of building nuclear submarines in the United Kingdom. I went there to see it firsthand, to understand what is coming our way and what we need to do. And I went there with high expectations and big hopes of what to see. I went into this massive building, and when I say massive building, it is huge. And went in there, got in the lift and went all the way to the top of this thing, and we walked out, and I knew I was going to be walking out and looking on the submarines being constructed. So I was expecting to see something quite remarkable. So I went up and I walked out, and despite my expectations, the moment I walked out and from an elevated view could see what was unfolding before my eyes, it struck me instantly that we have no comprehension really of the size and the scale of what is coming our way, let alone the technical complexity. It was like looking down on these ginormous cylinders. This was not an assembled submarine. These were parts of the submarine. Ginormous cylindrical metallic objects which had high-vis ants crawling all over them. And then we went out into another area, and there were rooms as far as you could sort of see, full of young people on multi-screen computers doing work that I looked over their shoulder meant absolutely nothing to me whatsoever. Highly technical engineering, problem solving in the design of these submarines. 10,000 people. 10,000 people employed directly at this one location. We went to the academy that has been purpose-built to train people to work on the nuclear submarine manufacturing. This academy takes in 500 students every single year just to keep the workforce turning. And I went to one section of this academy, which in and of itself was huge, and they're doing electrical engineering. The next where was software engineering. The next where was fitter and turner, project design, you name it. But each of them had to do their qualification not to a standard that we have here in Australia, but to a very specific nuclear standard. When you want to change a light bulb on a submarine, it has to be done to a nuclear specification. Everything is more complex. Everything is done with a higher degree of regulation and sophistication and complexity. And all of this is now going to be happening 20 kilometres from where we are right now. 5,500 people are going to be employed there directly, all with a unique set of skills, all with their own particular expertise. And it's all going to be happening by the end of the decade we're in now. 4,000 people are going to be required to build the shipyard. That work starts at the end of this year. 4,000 people just to build the yard. The 5,500 people that will be employed to work on the submarines for decades to come is 4 times as many people that were working at Holden when it closed. And that's just the people employed directly. I haven't talked about all the indirect employees. The challenge we have got from a government public policy perspective is, where are these young people coming from? Because we approach this endeavour from a starting position of one that we haven't experienced in South Australia since the 70s. We are at full employment. Many of you would employ, many of you would know people who are employing. I can't find a business in Adelaide at the moment whose number one grievance isn't finding staff or finding a particular skill or profession. So we've got to do all of this from a starting position of full employment, which means we have to do two things and do them quickly. First one is we have to turn our minds to what we do around migration policy, which is something my government is working on in a substantial way, which brings with it other challenges. But the other one is what we're doing around investing in education, training and skills amongst our young people. And that is why my government has a comprehensive education policy that we took to the election. We announced it in October 2021. It got very little attention because at that point no one thought we could win the election. But we announced a policy to do everything from, I'll step you through it. Starting in the early years, a plan to deliver universal access to 3-year-old preschool throughout the state, because every expert around the world tells you if you're going to invest more in education, do it in the early years. The most substantial generational investment in education in our state in 50 years. Universal access to 3-year-old preschool for a minimum of 15 hours a week for those parents who choose to take it. At schools, well, we are reinvesting in technical colleges, tech schools. These were ripped out of our public schools in the 1980s. It was wrong. It was a mistake. We should be able to provide students from year 10 and upwards the ability to make a decision in conjunction with their parent and guardian to choose to acquire a technical skill or a trade starting at school, which they can then translate into an immediate employment opportunity post-school. We're building 5 of these technical colleges. The first one is being constructed as we speak at Findon High School. The Findon Technical College opens at the beginning of the year, and we've already signed an agreement with BAE Systems, which is building the Hunter-class frigates. They need 2,000 additional people by 2026. BAE Systems has every chance to also be involved in the building of the submarines. Let me explain to you the way the program works. This is all locked in. Enrolments are open today, so if you've got a 14 or 15-year-old granddaughter or grandson, they can go online today. They can enrol at Findon Technical College in Advanced Manufacturing. When they complete their studies, they get a guaranteed job at BAE Systems the day they walk out the door at school. How good is that? So we're building 5 of these across the state, and then what we're also doing is pursuing university amalgamation, which David touched on earlier. University amalgamation is a can that this state has kicked down the road for 30 years. It is not a universally applauded or supported policy, but it is our firm conviction this is the right thing to do to give us scale in terms of research and engineering. If the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia come together to create a new university, it'll be the single largest educator of domestic students in the nation, dramatically increasing our research base, dramatically increasing our capacity to commercialise that research and in turn deliver an economic dividend to the state, with a clear eye on specific areas, particularly STEM, which is why I applaud the work that Rotary is doing in respect to STEM, mission critical. So that's just education. I can feel the wind-up coming again. I was just warming up. But that's the education program. Much of it not easy, particularly the university amalgamation, but full of conviction to try and achieve the realisation of the opportunity in those other 2 areas. Those 2 areas. The second area I mentioned was decarbonisation. Well, because of our position in terms of green renewable technology, we can produce what will be a fuel of the future. To what extent is a fuel of the future, time will tell, but it will play a role to play, and that is hydrogen. We can produce hydrogen cheaper in South Australia anywhere else in the world because of our coincident wind and solar resource, which is world leading. It's us, Western Australia, and parts of southern United States, namely California and Texas. we've got the best in the world. That gives us the chance to produce hydrogen and do it cheaply, but we can't sit back and wait for someone else to do that. That's why the state government is investing $593 million of your money building the world's largest hydrogen electrolyser and power plant. This is a risky project. It is a bold and ambitious project, but it's a very deliberate policy, which I could talk about ad nauseum, a very deliberate policy to position South Australia as the world leader in the decarbonisation effort around hydrogen. And not just for hydrogen to export to other parts of the world, although that will have a role to play, but more importantly, to use hydrogen for domestic consumption, for industrial means, to grow the state's economic base. Think, for example, the production of green iron or green steel in Whyalla. So whether it be university amalgamation, building the world's largest hydrogen electrolyser or power plant, or a whole suite of other policies, we are not afraid from taking bold, risky decisions, using that political capital with a very clear view to realise the opportunity that we have before us. But no matter where I go, no matter how hard I try in the mainstream media to talk about technical colleges, university amalgamation, the Northern Water Project, which is about hydrogen, or the hydrogen power plant itself, no matter how hard I try, the only thing that people seem to want to be talking to me about is bloody gather round or live golf or whatever might be going on in the event space. My view about that is this. This state has hid its light under the bushel for a little bit too long. We have a story to tell. We are at full employment. We are moving up the trajectory in the right way in terms of labour productivity, upskilling our people to participate in the economy of tomorrow and create new economic ventures and new wealth for our state. We have to tell that story. We can tell it loudly and proudly, and major events gives us a platform to do it, which is why it's material, not just in terms of having people having a good time, but more importantly, putting us front and centre on the national and international stage. We deserve that. We deserve attention from the rest of the world for what it is that we're achieving here. And for as long as I've got the opportunity to be able to have a positive impact on that, it's one that I'm very, very grateful for. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Premier. You've been very generous with your time, and I'm sure all of our members and guests could listen to you for a lot longer, as much as you may have more to say. We do know that you have to leave sharp on 2, and that's when we close as well. But
we have one question.
Can we push it back a bit?
Oh, being more generous.
Only because I don't want to look like I'm avoiding questions.
No, so the idea of sending questions to Rajiv was not the Premier's, that was ours. He is open to questions.
I can do 15.
Yeah, sure, okay.
All right.
First question, Premier, from a member, Gary McDougall. How is the Premier enjoying his role, and do you have a good work-life balance?
Well, don't ask my wife that. Second, look, the short answer is yes. I am enjoying it. This is said by people in positions like mine often, flippantly, but it is a privilege. If I do my job well in the time that I've got it, then hopefully I'm having a positive impact on people's lives, and that is extremely satisfying. Let me also be honest. Of course, you know, you do you feel the weight of responsibility. Like it doesn't sort of ever leave you, which is part of the gig. So I'm not complaining about it. You know what you're signing up for, so I'm not complaining about it. But it's sort of, there's a permanent sense that you've got the responsibility of serious leadership. But I am really enjoying it. There's lots that we want to be able to do. The only thing that's hard, that is regrettable, is just not being able to spend as much time with the kids as we'd like. We've got a young family. My wife works as well. They're beautiful kids, and you do feel on occasions a bit guilty that you're not doing everything you should. But you make those sacrifices knowingly that hopefully you're contributing to a better future for not just them, but that generation. And the other thing I'm conscious of, that these jobs are temporary by nature. It's politics. You never know how long you'll have a job like this for. That's up to people like you. I want it for a little bit, just. But you just got to throw everything at it, and while you can, and that is satisfying.
Heidi asked the question, peace building is at the center of what Rotary members do. How can we as Rotarians help you to build South Australia as a state of peace?
What was the first part?
State of peace, peace building. Yeah.
Oh, peace building, yeah. Well, that's a more important question now than it's probably been at any other point since Vietnam. Yeah. I think we've got to do two things at the same time, really thoughtfully. The first, of course, is do everything we can to preserve Australia's capability to maintain our sovereignty through the defence posture and defence policy. The acquisition of nuclear submarines certainly makes a very big difference in that regard. But soft diplomacy has always been as powerful a tool as kinetic warfare or defence policy. And soft diplomacy is something that Australia has sort of let fall by the wayside a little bit in recent times past. One of the things that I think we contribute to in South Australia particularly well in that regard is doing multiculturalism and migration well, but also international students. When international students come to our state and have a positive experience and they take that story home, regardless of where they come from and in the world, that actually contributes to a diplomatic effort that is exceptionally powerful. If you look at the history of the opposite of peace, if you look at it can be, war can principally, and violence can principally be derived from the actions of misplaced authoritarian regimes, or tragically it can be a function of misunderstanding and a lack of diplomatic effort to appreciate the perspective of others. We can do a lot to avoid that latter one. We can do a lot to avoid that, particularly in the modern world. The first one is harder to account for, which is why we've got to invest in our defence posture simultaneously. And to that regard, South Australia will be making a big contribution to the national effort.
Last question for you. What do you want your legacy to? That's Lisa's question. What do you want your legacy to?
Yeah. I wouldn't mind Port Adelaide winning a premiership. I don't suspect if that happens, I'll get any credit. But no, look, I don't think about it in that way. I think that's I think that's a bit dangerous. The truth is, I'm in this position because my colleagues have put their confidence in me to lead my particular party, and then the community put their confidence in the party to do a good job. So it is a genuine team effort. I don't think about a specific legacy, but what I do think about is if as a government we can have a positive impact on two things, then that will bring with it that extraordinary degree of satisfaction I referred to earlier. Those two things are this. We have to sort of expand the South Australian economic base to be able to facilitate a positive impact on future generations in a sustainable way. That's been a challenge for our state, but I think we've got that big opportunity to do it. The second element of that, though, is this. The truth is that in a modern, wealthy society, such as the one that we enjoy here, we can do more to provide opportunity to those who might otherwise miss out on it through no fault of their own. Now, that doesn't just happen in a purely market-based economy. Government policy does have a role to play. Public education, public health are good examples of that. So if we can do the first and then make sure at the same time we're orientating our effort to do a bit of the second, then we create a society that is more harmonious, more engaged in a sense of civic duty and civic responsibility for the common good, that actually enhances our liberal democracy in a wholeheartedly positive way. Democracy around the world at the moment is going through a bit of a rough patch. That hasn't really played out in South Australia or in Australia in the same way that it has in the US or Western Europe or even the UK, think Brexit. And my view is that the reason why we haven't had that intensity of political disharmony like we've seen in other countries is because, in truth, we are an egalitarian society, and I think Australians do think about others more than just a relentless focus on the individual, unlike in other parts of the world. And if we can retain that, we create a society where, of course, there will be disparity in wealth, but not disparity in wealth to the extent that we have people completely left behind where they feel they have to resort to no other option apart from being angry about the democracy in which they participate. So if we grow the economic base and improve the wealth of the state, and then at the same time provide opportunity to those who don't have much, then we contribute to a better society, and that is something that I would have thought everyone wants to be part of.
Just wait a minute. Thank you, Premier. I think no matter your political persuasion, your talk today has been inspiring, and it's given us hope that you will do everything you can to bring the wealth, opportunity and equality into our state.